All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So I'm Brian Ekins, the designer for the Fusion API, and today we're going to be talking about commands and the user interface. And so let's go ahead and get started. All right, so Fusion commands. So some of this initial stuff is pretty obvious. So they're typically executed by the user just by clicking a button. But they can be, you can run any Fusion command through the API too, and I'll show you in just a second. But when a command is run, so if I execute, say, the extrude command through the API, it's the same as the user clicking the button in the UI. But I can start the command, but I can't interact with it while it's running. So the only command I really interact with is custom commands I've created myself. So I can kick off other commands, but that's as far as it goes, is just starting it. And so all commands, and by all I mean all Fusion commands and any custom commands that you create, are all represented as what we call command definition object. And all commands are accessed through this command definitions collection, which you get from the user interface object. So there's this big collection, and I can go through that. I can go and find a specific command or just look at all the commands that are available. And then when I get a command, there's an execute method on it that just starts it. And once you start it, then you've kind of let go, and it's just going to do whatever it's going to do. And so if you want to create a custom command, you again use this command definitions collection, and there's an add method on that to create, or there's 3 add methods we'll talk about in just a second, but to create your own command definition. So you're adding a command into the set of Fusion commands. And what commands do is they define the information that's needed to display your command in the UI. And so what does that mean? So the definition is, so it has the name associated with it. So that's what is displayed in the UI. So in this case, ellipse. So that's the name of the command that the user sees. The command definition also defines the icon. It defines the tooltip, so that's just when the user moves over the command, that additional text. And some commands have this image too that's called a tool clip, and so that's also part of the command definition. And the command definition also defines the behavior in the UI, and so that's is it visible or not, and is it enabled or not. So the command definition isn't the command itself, so it doesn't have the intelligence of what the command is going to do or anything. It's just all the information that's needed to be able to display typically a button in the UI. But it's also not the button yet. It's just all the information packaged up to be able to display a button. And so one other thing, the big thing that the command definition does is it handles, or it provides the command created event, and we'll talk in more detail about that. So, all right. So I said the command definition specifies the icon, And the way icons are done in Fusion's a little bit interesting. So this is how it's done internally in Fusion. So this was already set up, and the API is just using the internal model and exposing that. So how you specify an icon is by specifying just a folder. And so here's some example code that's going to create a custom command. So you can see it connects to the application, gets the user interface object from it, and then it gets that command definitions collection from the user interface object, and then it's calling this add button definition method on the command definitions. And so that's creating this custom command definition. And so the first argument there, the mesh intersect, that's an ID. And so that needs to be unique with respect to all other commands. So usually you might prefix that with your company name or something that is going to make that unique. The next argument is the name of the command. So that's what shows up in the UI as the name. The next argument is the tooltip. And then that last one is where the icon is. And so in this case, you can use a relative path, and that's relative to where your source file is. So this is a Python program, so it's going to be relative to where my .py file is, and JavaScript where my JS file is, in C++ where my DLL or dylib file is. So here I'm specifying a relative path. So I have a folder called resources, and inside that folder I have a folder called mesh intersect, and inside that folder are going to be my my image files. And so this is what I'm saying is how Fusion does it. So by specifying a folder, and then each icon. So I'll show you in a second. We have multiple images for different how the button is displayed in Fusion, and each image is a separate ping file. And Fusion looks inside that folder you specified and looks for files, ping files of a certain name, and then it uses that for when it needs to show an icon. And so here are the different sizes that are used. So basically you have 16 by 16, and that's shown when you have like a drop down. I should have had some illustrations of where these show up, but just in, if I say this, so this is for the extrude, and if I go to the model panel and drop down, then I see the extrude command, and next to it is going to be this 16 by 16 icon. And then if I promote that, which we'll look at in a minute, up to the top, then it's displayed as a 32 by 32 icon. And these other ones, so there's a 64 by 64 that is used on Mac when there's a Retina display. But it has this funny name because it's actually, so it's a 64 by 64, but it's named 32 by 32 at 2x. So it's used as a 32 by 32 icon, but it's 2 times the resolution of a standard 32 by 32. And then there's also this 16 by 16 at 2x. And so that's really a 32 by 32, but it's used as the 16 by 16. So we've got these 3 different sizes, and so that 32 by 32 and 16 by 16 are the same file, just copied and renamed. So I didn't have to do any extra work to get that one other than do the file. And then for each size, there's 3 states of the icon. So there's the standard one, this dark one, and what that is when, as you move your mouse over the buttons, the background of the button goes dark, just to show that your cursor is over that button. And so if you want, you can create a separate icon for when the button is in that state. And when you would do that is if you have something in your icon that would kind of disappear because it's almost the same color as that dark background. And so in that case, you could, change those colors to something else when it's in that state. So, and then disabled, of course, is when the command's disabled, and so that's usually a kind of a grayed out icon. And so if you want to create all of these, then you would deliver with your program 16 ping files of these different states and sizes. Or 16, no, 12. I don't know why I have 16, but 12. And but if you don't have all of the icons there, then Fusion will kind of create and reuse what it needs as far as the dark and disabled too. I think I'm not sure what it does with disabled, but so and most icons don't need a separate one for dark. It's fine to just reuse the standard one. So I typically will create 8 files and have my standard and the disabled of the 4 different sizes. All right, so command definitions. So there's one command definition object, but it has associated with it a control definition, and that control definition defines the kind of how this command will display itself in the UI. And so the most common one is a button. And so when you're creating your command definition, you would use the add button definition to say, I want to create a command definition that's going to be represented as a button in the UI. And so that's obviously in all of these that I've highlighted. There's also checkbox command definitions. So in this case, I've got 3 separate checkbox definitions, or there's 4 in this dialog anyway. Those 3 layout ones, and then the increment. So these are really simple commands. They don't, but they're just used to get a state from a user. And so when I click that checkbox, a command is actually executed and does something in reaction to that state of the checkbox changing. But so you can create these kind of commands if you just need a toggle. And then there's also list commands. So in this case, the visual style that's a command. And so when I add that command into the UI, it's going to display it with this drop down. And there's 3 kind of styles for a list. And then this example is where you have a radio button. So it'll pop up. I can see what's currently selected and then pick any other one, and then it dismisses itself. Another type is this checkbox type of list. In this case, it pops up and it stays up, and I can select and unselect checkbox items, and then it clicks somewhere else, and then it goes away. And finally, just a list of text, and that just pops up. I can pick one, and it goes away. So, all right, so those are all different types of commands. With button by far the most commonly used ones. So again, all we've done is just define. we haven't even created a button yet. We've just defined the information that's needed to display a button. And so now we want to have that button show up somewhere in the UI. And we do that by adding a control into the UI. So a control just really defines a position somewhere in the user interface, and I'll talk in just a second about the different places. And it references the command definition to be able to get the information it needs to display itself. And so I can have one command definition, and I could have access to that single command several places. And so I would have multiple controls, but all those controls reference that single command definition. So now if I change the enabled state, then all of those controls would change too. So I just change it on the command definition, and now all of the controls would change to disabled or enabled because they're all referencing that one definition object. Right, so there are 4 types of toolbar controls. So the most common is a command, so that's just a button. Another one is a drop down, and that's this project include. So that's just for organization within the user interface. So it doesn't clicking that doesn't do anything. It just pops up this list of commands. Right? So it's just a way to build some organization into the UI. So I can create a drop-down control, and there's also this split button control, which isn't commonly used, but Fusion does have it, and that's this guy. I think this is the only place where Fusion uses it. And what this is so if I just click the button, it will execute that constrained orbit command. But if I click the little arrow next to the button, then it brings down this pop-up, and then I can select from multiple commands. And then if I pick, say in this case, free orbit, then that becomes the default command at the top after that. And so in the API, that's optional if you want to change the default or not. But so it lets you have quick access to a command or access to a list of commands. And then the one other type of toolbar control is just a splitter. And that again is just for organization. So you can just draws a line in the menu to so you can group commands and help make it a little easier for the user to see and find things. All right, so Fusion's user interface. So let's look and see what options you have for where to put commands. So there's something called a workspace, and so that's where I pick really what I'm going to do. And so this is just in the user interface. This is just a way to display the set of commands that are useful for my current task. Right. So if I pick model, then I see just modeling related commands. If I pick animation, then that main toolbar changes and I see just animation related commands, and same for cam. So it's a way to change what commands are displayed that are applicable to my current task. Toolbars, and there's a few of these. So this one displayed there now, so that's called the QAT, or Quick Access Toolbar. And an important thing there is the file menu. So there's quite a few commands in that, and depending on what your command does, that might be a place where you want to insert it. But so you have access to that Quick Access Toolbar. There's also a QAT Write, where the help is, and so So you have access to that. And then at the bottom, there's this toolbar called the nav toolbar, because that's has all the window kind of stuff and navigation things to change the camera orientation. But so there are some other toolbars that are used in special cases, but these three toolbars are typically where you might want to insert your commands, and they're always displayed, so you know that they'll always be there. And then there's kind of the heart of the command system are this toolbar panels. All right, so there's multiple panels within that main toolbar, and so for example, here's the sketch panel. So wait a second for the screen to refresh. So we have the sketch panel, and then within the panel, you have this, it's basically a list of commands, right? But then organized using splitters and these drop downs. And so I have all these commands, and then the user can choose whether he wants to promote that. So in this case, if I click that little up arrow next to the command, and if I move over that little up arrow, it'll show that tooltip, add to toolbar. And what that does is that pops it up to the top. So I have just quick one-click access to that command. So the user can pick any command he wants out of the drop-down and promote that to the top. He can also unpromote things, so I'll pull them out of that. So he has really control about what he sees in that top level. Okay, so inserting your command into the UI. And so how do you do that? And this is an example, this is an app that I had written that's on the Exchange store, this intersect mesh body that the command you can see down there. And what that does is if you have a mesh body in your file, you can create a sketch and then run this command, and then it creates sketch geometry that represents the intersection of the XY plane of the sketch and that mesh body. Right? So it's creating sketch geometry, and so it seemed like it made sense to put it in this project and include, because the Fusion's intersect command is already there, and so I wanted to put it next to it. All right. So what's the process to do that? And here's the code. So the first thing I need to do, so I'm basically traversing through this UI to get down into where I want to insert my command. So the first thing I'm doing is from the user interface object, there's this all toolbar panels. And I'm asking for a panel called sketch panel. And so that is the sketch panel as we see it here. And so I get that back. And so one thing, stepping back a little bit, is the way Fusion does the toolbar panels is there's really one big list of every toolbar panel, and that's what this all toolbar panels is going to return. So it's irrespective of what workspace is currently active. Right? So there's two ways to get toolbar panels. Is I can do this all toolbars panel, and then I get every toolbar panel that's available, or I can go to a particular workspace and ask it for the panels associated with it. But really, there is a big list, and when I'm switching workspaces, what Fusion is doing is it knows which panels are associated with that workspace, and then it's just turning their visibility on and off. And so it's just changing which panels the user sees. based on what workspace is active. And so anyway, here I'm getting the collection of all toolbar panels and getting sketch panel from it. So now I have that panel. And then from that panel, I'm asking it for the list of controls inside it. And I want the control named project include dropdown. So that's this thing that's just highlighting there. So now I have that dropdown. And now I'm adding a control to that. So on that dropdown, there's a controls property, and that gives me the list of all of the controls that are in the dropdown. And then I'm calling add command. I'm passing in my command definition, which is this variable mesh intersect button. That intersect command, that is the name of the intersect command that you can see there. So I'm inserting it relative to that, and I want it to go after. That's what true is, whether it's before or after. And then, so that inserts my button, and then I'm done. And so now it behaves like any other Fusion command. So if the user uses this command a lot, he could move to the right-hand side of the button and promote that to the top where you'd have easy access to it. And so it's like any other button. All right, so probably the question you might be thinking now is, okay, how do I know that it's called sketch panel, and how do I know it's called project include dropdown, and that command is called intersect command? And so this is how I was able to figure that out. Is there's a sample program, and so if you go to the API help and into sample programs, and you can see there under the commands main topic, and then under subtopic user interface, and then there's a sample called write user interface to a file. And so if you copy that code into a script, this one's only available as a Python program, but you create a new script and copy this into it and run it, then that will dump out the entire user interface into just a text file. And so here's kind of the information. I'll bring up the file in a second so you can see more of what's in there. But here's the pieces of that file that I use. So inside that file, it's going to give me the complete structure of the user interface. And so by looking in that file, I see sketch panel. And so that's where I got that name. And then underneath sketch panel, I could see this project include dropdown. So there's a dropdown control, and that's its ID. So I was able to use that. And then I could find that there's a control in there that's referencing a command called intersect command. And so anyways, by looking through this file and finding the things that I'm interested in, and then I can able to insert my command. So let me just show you what that file looks like. And this probably won't work that great just because of the latency of the. But so here's the file. Okay, there's 7 toolbars, so it's listing all the toolbars first. So there's a toolbar called Active View Toolbar. I don't remember where that's used. Another one called Common Toolbar, Fusion Dock Nav Toolbar. So these are all kind of strange ones that aren't used very often. I played with them one time, but see where they were, but I forgot now. So here's the Nav Toolbar. So that's the one at the bottom, remember? And so the first thing I have is a split button control. And right now there's a bug, so I can't see what commands are inside it, but I can see that the orbit command is the default command for that. Next to that, there's the look at command, the pan command, zoom command. So I see all those there. So here's some drop downs. And so typically, then what I do is just search in here. So I know in this case I want to go to Sketch. So I'm expecting that it's going to have, and it typically does, the same names that you see in the user interface. So here I go. So Sketch panel, right? So that's the name of the panel. And then inside the Sketch panel are multiple controls. So we've got Sketch Create, Draw Polyline. There's a drop down called Rectangle drop down. Inside it are the three different ways, three different commands to draw a rectangle. Right? So this just matches up to exactly the same structure that I'm seeing in the user interface. So it's just kind of looking through this, matching it up to the user interface, and finding the place where I want to insert my command and getting the names that are going to let me traverse through the UI to get to that point, and then using those names to do this that we're seeing in this code. And so most of them will actually even be simpler than this because they won't be in a drop down. There'd be one less statement. But the trick is just getting those names so to be able to position your command where you want it. All right, so where to put your commands, and they should just be put where they logically would make sense to the user. And so I kind of explained that mesh intersect one as I was thinking, okay, well, it's a sketch command, it's creating sketch geometry, it's similar to the command that already exists, the intersect. So I think that would make sense for where the user would look for it. And so you want to just kind of go through that process with whatever command you're doing. Is it similar to some Fusion commands already? Then maybe you want to put it in with those. But if it's not, and in a lot of cases with custom commands, I mean, it's doing something that Fusion just doesn't do, and so it doesn't really fit in. And so what was added in this last release is this add-ins panel. And the reason for this add-ins panel is just for a place for everything that doesn't have a logical home. And so we'd really encourage you to add your commands into here if if it doesn't have another logical place. And the reason for this is that main set of toolbar panels, I mean, there's limited space there, and if everybody creates a new panel and adds their command to it, then it starts to fill up. And it may not look that full initially. There might be some room to the side. Maybe it's just 2/3 full by default, but the users are promoting the commands they use up to the top, so they have quick access to it. So it can quickly fill up just as they customize it the way they want. And if they really want to use your command a lot, they can promote your command up so they have easy access to it too. So you don't need to have your command right, staring them in the face, because everybody feels like their command, their functionality is the most important, and the user needs it right there for him. But if everybody does that, then we're out of room. So this add-ins panel, so we're really encouraging people to put their add-ins in there if it doesn't have another logical spot. Right. And if you have an add-in that has several commands, you can create a drop-down inside this add-ins. And so maybe that drop-down is the name of my company or the kind of the main add-in, and then off to the side, then I would have all the commands. So just like the rectangle, where I have a rectangle and then I have the different commands to create rectangles. All right, so that's kind of the basics of creating this command and inserting it into the user interface. But now what happens when the user actually runs my command? Right? How do I make it do something useful? And so Fusion has a really well-defined concept of what a command is. And this is unlike Inventor, at least in the API in Inventor. You can create commands, but there's not a command. It's a bunch of loose things, separate things that you kind of use, and it ends up building what looks like to the user a command. But Fusion is different. There's a really well-defined definition of what a command is. And excuse me. So a command has a UI to run the command, to get it kicked off. So it's usually just the user clicking a button. And when it runs, it displays a common dialog. And by common, so when you run any of the Fusion commands, you see this dialog that looks similar from one command to the other. The input inside it is different, but it's still a very similar dialog. So this common dialog, and we'll talk in more detail about that. But so the command can display a dialog if it needs to gather some additional input from the user. And then as the user's providing that input, once he's provided enough input, then most commands typically show a preview of what the results will be. I can just click cancel on the dialog and then nothing happens, right? Even though I've seen a preview, then I can do cancel and do nothing. Or if I click OK, then it actually does whatever the command's supposed to do. Right. And the results of that command can be undone in a single undo. All right, so here's what you have to do to make this work. So you create a command definition like we've already talked about, right? So that's just the icon and the name and all that stuff. And when you create that command definition, you also connect to an event. So you create a handler for this command created event. And then you add your command into the UI, like we've already talked about. And then your add-in just sits back and waits. So this is happening when your add-in gets started. So if your add-in is set to load on startup, so Fusion, when it's initially starting, goes and finds all the add-ins that are flagged for load on startup, and it runs that add-in. And so this is typically what the add-in is doing during that initial startup, is creating all its command definitions and connecting to their events and then adding them into the UI, and then Fusion displays. And now the add-in is still running, but it's just sitting in the background and just waiting. And so now the user sees the command that the add-in is run, he clicks it, and Fusion creates a command object. So there's a defined class or object called the command, and Fusion creates a command object, and then it fires the command created event to the person that created that command or that defined that command originally. So that's you. So now you get this event, and as part of that event, Fusion passes you the command object. And in response to that command created event, you define what we call command inputs. So those are the things on that dialog, excuse me, those are the things on the dialog that the user is going to need to provide, so that the inputs that the command needs. So you're basically building up the dialog, defining what the dialog is going to look like, and you connect to command related events. So now you have a command and going to connect to events associated with that command. All right, so once you've kind of finished that command created event, then now Fusion displays your command dialog. And the user interacts with it to provide whatever inputs you're asking for. And then while he's doing that, you react to events to do these things. Is to validate the input, and you don't even always have to do this, as Fusion does some validation itself. For example, if I have a selection input, I could say, well, they have to select at least one thing. So I define that in the input itself, and so Fusion knows that, and so it won't enable the OK button until that requirement has been met. But you can do any kind of validation you want to make sure values are within certain ranges or whatever. But so you can validate the input, you can filter the input, and so this one specifically is for selection, and I'll show an example of this in a second. You can show a preview of the results, and I'll demonstrate this too. And then so there's all these events going on as the user's interacting with the dialog. So for example, when they click a drop down in the dialog, then maybe you want to display some other inputs or hide some inputs or change a value. So you can do all of that. But then once the user's provided all of the input needed, and he clicks the OK button, then a command executed event is sent, which you connected up earlier when you created the excuse me, in response to the command created event. And then in the command executed, you do whatever the command's going to do. So here's an example of some command inputs, and let me go ahead and demonstrate this. So I have a little sample program. It's a little test program that I use to test the different inputs. But so just to give you an idea, so here's a value input. So this one is when I want to get some numeric value, typically of some type of unit. So here I've specified I want to get a distance unit from the user, and so 1 inch is valid. So just 1 is good, but that isn't good. It doesn't know what unit FF is. So 1 + 2 is valid. 3 inches plus 5 centimeters. So that's valid for a distance. All right. So it's pretty flexible. If I had, I don't know what parameters I've got in this dialog, but I could use, so if there's, so I don't have one called D0, but if there was one, that would work too. So I can use parameter names. This next one is just any string. So there's no validation going on there. Here's some spinner controls. So the user can just type in something, or I can use these little spinners to the right and click, and it'll increment it by some value. let's see, selections. So now, so I can pick stuff. Check boxes. So these are called bool. Well, it's a bool value input, and it can be displayed in 3 different ways: as a checkbox, or just getting a click of a button, or a button that has a state, so it can be pressed or not. And you can have, you can see text or there's some drop-down inputs, and they can be displayed in different ways. So here's a checkbox one, so I can select multiple items. It's drop down where I can select one item, and it has an icon associated with it, and then it shows me which item is selected in the top. This is just the same, but there's no icon. And this is basically the same too, but I just have a radio button next to it. So it just depends on what look you want to show. There's sliders, so I can do a slider to get a floating point number, sliders for integers, and again, there's all different kinds of stuff with sliders. I won't go into detail there. You can have a text box, so this is different than the one up above. This can have multiple lines, and you can have read-only text boxes, and it's using kind of basic HTML to display the contents of that. And you can have links in there too. So if I click this, then it'll actually open up the browser and take me to that. And here's a multi-select button row, so I can select multiple items, or here's one where it's behaving more like a, well, I have to pick just one item from the list. Right. And this is just a test that I've done, so where it's listening to what I do in the dialogue, and then just updating some text based on that. And so this is an area where we're continuing to do some additional work as to expose more and more command inputs. So like what's totally missing in this current version that we're working on defining right now is command inputs that also have a graphic manipulator. So for example, when I do an extrude and there's a little arrow that comes up, and I can drag that to show the extent of the extrude. And so as I drag that, a field on the dialog is changing to show me the value. And so that's an input that has a value in the dialog, and also that manipulator that in the graphic window. So, excuse me. So that's so we're working on exposing more of those. All right. So let's look. So last night I put together a command to try and show a lot of the functionality that's here. And let's see. And it's this command right here, cut out shapes. Not sure why it's there twice. I have to check. But so when I run that command, so here's the dialog. So it's asking me to pick a plane and some points, which can be sketch points or construction points. Then I have a drop down with these 3 different shapes and a size. And I just used a slider. There's a little bit of a problem with this being cut off, but just a slider to just to make it a little more dynamic here. But so I pick a plane, and the plane is I defined in this when I created the input that I need one thing and only one. So I can't pick multiple planes. It stopped at one. But points, I can pick multiple points. So it has to have at least one, but it can have any number. And so now OK is enabled. If I clear that, see OK isn't enabled. And Fusion's doing that automatically. It knows that I have to have at least one thing selected there. And I'm doing some validation in the selection. Excuse me. Doing some validation because I only want to select points that lie on the plane. And so I've told the selection, so when I created the select input, I can specify at a high level what should be selected. So I said sketch points, vertices, and construction points. But what I also want, an additional limitation on that, is I only want points that lie in the plane that was selected. And so in my code, as the user moves over one of these points, and before it highlights back to the user, it's firing an event to me, and I get that point, and I do some analysis to see if it lies in that plane or not. And then if it does, I say, yeah, okay, it's available for selection. But if it doesn't lie in the plane, then I say no, and then it's not. So as I move over these points, you can see they're all selectable. But this one down here is on the bottom. If I move over it's not selectable. Or the same if I come into this corner, then you can see I can pick that vertice that's at the top, but if I try and pick the one at the bottom, it doesn't pick. So I can do this dynamic filtering, and so the user's only able to pick what I want him to pick. And so here's what the command does: is it just draws a shape and extrudes it at any of the pick points. And so I'll pick a couple more. So there's these squares that we can see, and I can change the shape. Well, I want circles instead. And so the preview updates. Maybe I want these pentagons instead. Preview updates. I want to change, I want them bigger. So I just scroll that, the preview updates. And so I'm doing a preview, and then if I click cancel, nothing happened. So let's go back, pick some points. It is previewing now, it's just that they're so small we can't see them. But there we go. And now if I click OK, then I get the result. And if I go to undo, you can see the last thing was undo cutout shapes. So my command is called cutout shapes. So everything that I did inside that command, which was take the plane that they picked, create a new sketch on it, draw geometry that represents those shapes for each of the points, and then do an extrude feature. So it did a whole bunch of API calls, which each one, if I did outside of a command, would have an undo step. But this combines it all into one single undo. So if I do undo, then it all goes away. I can redo it. So I got that free from this being inside a command. And the way the preview works is I have code inside my command that does those steps that I just said, creates a sketch, draws the geometry, does the extrude. So I have a program that takes, or a little function that whose input is the face, the points, and a size, and then it draws all that geometry. And there's an event I'm listening to do the preview, and inside that, what it just calls that function. So it's actually modifying the model. It's doing all of that work, and then if I move that slider or change any of the input, then it's calling that function again. So what it did is it basically undid everything and it redoes it again. So it's just doing that very fast. It's building it, undo, building it, undo, building it, undo, and then on the final execute, then it's doing it for good and then leaves it in that state. All right, so one more thing I want to touch on is events. So events are a critical thing to be able to do commands. And so here's, and the help is, with this latest release, I think is pretty helpful on implementing events. So if I go, in this case, to the command definition, then it has a list of the events that it supports. And there's just one, so it supports this command created event. If we look at the command object, then it has a whole bunch of events that let me react to that selection, the preview, any input is changed, to validate the input. There's events for all kinds of stuff there. So this would be a big list. But here I can see this has an event, command created. If I click on that event, then it takes me to the topic for it. But the important thing here is this syntax. So this has some code that I can really just copy and paste into my program and quickly implement a handler for this event. And I might debating whether to demonstrate or not. So let's go through the rest and maybe come back if how much time we have. So some things that are missing still in the API. So there's no access to the context menu. So I can't do any customization of it yet. There's no access to the browser, but Fusion doesn't really support any kind of customization there yet itself. So I'm not sure, what we would do through the API currently. But there's no access to the view cube. So if you wanted to add some command that's a view-related command under that drop down in the view cube, that's not currently possible. and you're really limited to that custom dialog and the set of inputs that we provide. So if you need some really fancy dialogues that's got tables and all kinds of weird inputs and whatever, then you're kind of out of luck right now. So the only way, so there's a couple of things. So Python supports something called tkinter, but there's some issues with using it on Mac. And so it works okay on Windows, but not on Mac. So that's a problem. And a lot of people have asked about using Qt, and there's a problem with that in that Fusion uses Qt for its UI, and it's very possible that if you use Qt, then there's you're going to have your Qt library, Inventor's going to have its Qt library, and running in the same process, and it's likely there's going to be some conflicts there. So it might work and it might not, and there's not really a way for us to test that. So it's not something that we're supporting at all, and discourage anybody from trying that. So the other solution is in C++ is to use the platform specific dialog. So on Windows to use it's Win32 and build up your dialog that way. On Mac you'd use Cocoa, and so it'd be completely different implementations for Mac and for Windows. But then it is possible that you could build a custom dialog there. So we're trying to figure out a better solution for this, but don't really have a good one right now. So that's a limitation. All right. So here's some upcoming sessions. So this one today on commands, understanding the next one next Tuesday is looking at the design structure and then the model geometry. And so let me know again on the TBD what we want to talk about. So maybe I'll go ahead and stop there, and we'll see if there's some questions, and I can do some more demos depending on what the questions are. So there's a question. It says in the event handler slide, I use a class for Python, and can we use a class with JavaScript? And I don't know. I haven't tried it. I think in the code that it brings up for JavaScript, if you look at that event, I think it's just a function that it's calling, so it doesn't have to create a class for it. So, which actually is a little bit simpler, but to try it and see. So I don't know.
You want to talk? Saurabh, you can ask. I have unmuted you.
All right. So another question: could I create a panel which is itself a button? I don't want to drop down. Yeah. So if you create a panel, so a panel associated with the panel, there's always a list, and you're just saying which items from that list show up at the top. Right? But you can say which of those items in the list should show up in the top by default. Right? So the user can say reset the panels, and then it goes back to the default. And so in your case, you would be creating a new panel. You would be adding a single button into that panel, and you would say that button should be in the top by default, and then that does it. And because there aren't any other commands, I think the drop down doesn't even show up since it's empty, I believe, in that case. But like I said before, we're really discouraging people from doing that, because if everybody does that, then there's no more room, and it's better if you're not at that top level. It should be in the add-ins panel, and then if the user, if that is a command that the user likes a lot, then he can promote it, and so it would be at the top. All right, and any other questions or requests to see anything in more detail? Or all right, so question, when I click on a button box, the command is executed, but when I finish the command, the canvas is turned on. Right, if I execute the same command but call the command from OK button, the canvas is turned off. Yeah, I'm not sure. That might be a better one if you could email us with some kind of more of an example. I'm not quite sure how what the details are there. Oh, and so there's a question where to place icons. And let me show for that sample that I just demonstrated that drew the shapes. All right, so I have, so here's my add-ins directory with all of the add-ins on my system, right? So when I just said create a new add-in, it created this folder for me and created the,
Brian,
yep,
some delay.
okay,
Some delay.
yeah. So anyway, I have this, while that's painting, I'll describe a little bit. So I have this add-ins folder, right, where all my add-ins are. And when I created this new add-in, it created this cutouts folder for me. And initially I just had cutouts.manifest and cutouts.py. And then I just chose to create this resources folder so I could have a single folder where all my icons are kind of organized in there. But then I have subfolders inside it. So a subfolder for each thing. So inside this subfolder for circle, or just actually, I don't even need disabled. I just need the 16 by 16.ping. That's what it's going to show in the drop down. So in this case, I only need a 16 by 16. But for my command itself, then I have this folder, and it has my 16 by 16, 32 by 32s, and of the different sizes. So I've got this. Right. So hopefully that answers your question. And there's a couple of topics in the help that a lot of what I just talked about is there. And so in the help in the user's manual, there's this topic, user interface customization, and another one on commands. So you got so I would say 80% of what I talked about is already in there, and then a little more material that, and some of this maybe needs to be updated because it hasn't been updated in the last couple of releases. But all right, any other questions? All right, it looks like maybe that's it then. So yeah, thank you for attending, and hopefully this was helpful. And so a couple of things not related to this, but just the hackathon in general. So right, Tuesdays and Thursdays we're doing these presentations, and Monday, Wednesday, Friday are those open Q&A sessions. So if you have questions, and this whole thing is a little bit of an experiment, this format that we're doing. So we'll see if those Q&A sessions are needed. And we've been recording and posting these sessions, but we're having a little bit of technical issues with the audio, and so we're working through that. But we're posting them on the website for the hackathon, and also trying to get them on YouTube. So that's more convenient for some people than downloading the entire video. But so we're working on that. And let's see. So we've got another question: which of the languages is most effective to handle events? And I don't think it matters. They're all very similar in how you do it. So you're either creating a class, that's your event handler, or a function, and just connecting up. And so it's yeah, I don't think it matters which. I wouldn't pick one language over any of the others just based on how they handle events. It's all pretty similar. All right. Well, if there's no more questions, so thank you for attending, and we'll see you at an upcoming session. All right. Bye.